View.
Cardinal George Pell a free man. The High Court acquits him of child sex abuse. No Year 13. Students to graduate with an ATAR despite the disruption to schools.
And coming up on The Business, tackling rising tensions between tenants and their landlords. Businesses on the brink, hoping they can rely on the government's new code of conduct.
This is ABC Late News. Hello, I'm James McHale. Cardinal George Pell is free tonight after the High Court ruled there was a significant possibility an innocent man was wrongly convicted. The former advisor to the Pope was serving a 6-year jail term after being found guilty of abusing 2 choir boys in the 1990s. Sarah Farnsworth reports.
This is the moment Cardinal George Pell became a free man. After serving more than 400 days in jail, he was driven out of Barwon Prison near Geelong and taken to a monastery in Melbourne's inner east. In a statement released immediately, George Pell said he'd suffered a serious injustice. "I hold no ill will towards my accuser," he said. "I do not want my acquittal to add to the hurt and bitterness so many feel. The point was whether I had committed these awful crimes, and I did not." The quashing of his convictions for the sexual abuse of 2 choir boys more than 20 years ago ends one of Australia's most contentious cases. His friends have always believed Cardinal Pell was innocent.
I had an understanding of the man, and my knowledge of him was when he said he was innocent, I accepted that.
But Melbourne's Catholic Archbishop said his thoughts were also with the complainant, known only as Witness J.
Have a sense of reaching out to him in care and concern.
The other choir boy in the case died in 2014. His father is heartbroken by the court's decision.
He has expressed disgust at the outcome and he's really struggling to understand it and to accept it.
Prosecutors allege the abuse of the choir boys took place here in the priest's sacristy at St Patrick's Cathedral shortly after a Sunday Mass, within a 5 to 6 minute window. But witnesses testified George Pell would never have been alone in the room, and his usual practice was to greet parishioners on the cathedral steps straight after Mass. The High Court ruled, with that evidence, a jury acting rationally ought to have entertained a doubt as to the Cardinal's guilt, even if they found his accuser to be credible and reliable. The court ordered his convictions be overturned.
The highest court in the land has made its decision, and that must be respected.
While this marks the end of the criminal case, Cardinal Pell and the Catholic Church could face a fresh wave of civil action. The ABC understands at least 10 civil cases are planned, and they can go ahead in the absence of a conviction. As for the Cardinal's former standing, some think his time at the Vatican is now over.
When he turns 80, of course, like all other cardinals, he loses his vote for the Pope.
From a cell to a sanctuary, George Pell is celebrating his first taste of freedom. Sarah Farnsworth, ABC News, Melbourne.
It's been 5 years since the child abuse allegations against Cardinal Pell were first made. He was charged in June 2017 and pleaded not guilty. In a secret trial in September 2018, a jury failed to reach a verdict. 2 months later, a second jury found him guilty on 5 counts of child sex abuse. And a ban on reporting of the case was lifted in February last year, when prosecutors dropped separate charges against George Pell. Last August, the Victorian Court of Appeal upheld the convictions. The Cardinal's final recourse was last month's High Court hearing, leading to today's acquittal. And it's a case that continues to polarise public opinion.
George Pell is the highest-ranking Catholic to face a public trial. His acquittal is a relief for his supporters.
I really wouldn't want to say anything other than just let the judgment speak for itself.
But the ruling has wounded those dedicated to supporting survivors of clerical abuse.
Just devastating. Just devastating after everything that's happened.
Yeah, the court system's, is a difficult thing, and it just goes to show, today that even when, you have got a verdict, and then it can still be overturned.
The High Court decision has wiped out 5 years of police investigations and legal proceedings. Lawyers like Greg Craven have long argued the charges should not have gone to court.
A charge which always had a reasonable doubt a mile wide was pushed and hurried forward by sections of the media.
Australia's Catholic bishops welcomed the High Court decision but recognised the acquittal will be devastating for some. Any person with allegations of sexual abuse by church personnel should go to the police. The coronavirus lockdown has prevented Catholics from gathering together, but many are determined to revive their faith.
It's quite a challenge for believers. Many Catholics have lost faith in the leadership of the Church, perhaps not in Pope Francis, but in the local leadership. I think a lot of Catholics have. But that doesn't mean that we've given up on it.
Victorian Premier Daniel Andrews sent a brief message to every single victim and survivor of child sex abuse. I see you, I hear you, I believe you. Trauma services have already reported an influx of calls from child abuse survivors since the High Court decision. Cheryl Hall, ABC News.
Australians are being urged to stay home over Easter, with the Prime Minister warning the nation risks undoing all its hard work to flatten the coronavirus curve. Scott Morrison's plea came with the release of modelling, showing radical restrictions are the best way of ensuring critically ill Australians receive vital care. Political editor Andrew Probyn reports.
Minding the curve, now the necessary obsession.
We have so far avoided the horror scenarios that we have seen overseas.
Australia's curve, or infection rate, shows promise. Drastic measures appear to have arrested earlier signs of calamitous growth.
Quarantine and isolation and then social distancing, which we can dial up and down, have a major downward effect.
This has occurred quite rapidly, well beyond our expectations.
Scientists assessing what demands there might be for critical care in the months ahead. Their modelling has caveats. It's based on international data and isn't a prediction.
The next few weeks are absolutely crucial. We will see inevitably an increase in hospitalisations, admissions to ICU and deaths.
If the pandemic were left uncontrolled, the demand for intensive care beds would peak at 35,000 beds a day, about 28,000 more than Australia's ICU capacity. The second scenario assumes quarantine and isolation measures. This would see 17,000 Australians requiring ICU at the peak. About 10,000 would miss out. The third scenario models quarantine, isolation and social distancing measures, all of which have been implemented. Here, ICU demand peaks at just under 5,000 a day, which would be manageable.
Complacency is our biggest risk.
Those thinking of an Easter getaway told to think again.
We must keep the tension in the cord. Failure to do so this weekend would completely undo everything we have achieved so far together.
Eliminating the virus is not considered an option. The task instead, managing the infection so that those who need intensive care can get it. Flattening the curve will mean the outbreak lasts longer, although the PM hinted that those states that flatten the curve fastest will be the first to lift restrictions. But that's still months away. Andrew Probyn, ABC News, Canberra.
Students in Year 12 are facing challenges never seen before. But after a meeting of federal and state education ministers, they're being told they will not have to repeat their final year of school.
The lounge room has replaced the classroom, and social distancing has killed rites of passage enjoyed by generations of school leavers.
We're not going to get those memories and experiences that like a normal Year 12 year group would. And yeah, it sucks really. It's really sad.
Alexia Osler is one of 180,000 Year 12 students learning a new system in their most important year of school. Her dream is to study medical engineering at university.
I hope that I'm able to still go because, you know, no one's going to want to repeat Year 12.
Today, state and federal ministers tried to ease that anxiety by devising a national plan for Year 12s. University admission scores could be adjusted to reflect the hardship.
We will take into account those students who have to learn from home.
More detail and certainty is still to come, but the path to university remains viable.
There will be no Year 13, there will be no mass repeating. You will get your leaving certificate this year.
Few know the Year 12 testing regime like Sydney University's Professor Jackie Manuel. She used to be New South Wales's chief examiner for English and says exams should be scrapped, like in the UK, where teachers will set a final mark.
I think the time is now to make that decision so that it removes the kind of uncertainty and higher levels of stress.
Paragraph 2.
The pandemic class of 2020 welcomes any relief from the pressure of isolation. Connor Duffy, ABC News.
A state of emergency has been declared in Japan, primarily because of concern about an outbreak in the capital. The Prime Minister, Shinzo Abe, made the declaration to fight new coronavirus infections in major population centres. North Asia correspondent Jake Sturmer reports from Tokyo.
Life in the world's biggest city is shutting down. The number of coronavirus cases in Tokyo has more than doubled in the past week. More than 1,000 people are now infected. Residents want the new restrictions.
I think it is necessary to reduce victims and infected people.
I have a soap. I have a handle.
With more than 2 million views, Japanese social media celebrity Pico Taro is doing his bit to help stem the spread of the virus. It's a light-hearted reminder of the need for hand hygiene, but as the number of infections continues to rise, the Prime Minister is worried the health system will be overwhelmed.
We need further cooperation from citizens to minimise contact between people, which can lead to infections.
The state of emergency will cover Tokyo, Osaka and 5 other prefectures. It'll last for a month. Governors will have the powers to close schools and businesses, as well as ask people to stay at home.
In many ways, what's staying open and what's closing here in Tokyo is largely similar to what's already happened in Australia. Trains and public transport, that will remain operating. So too will supermarkets, daycares and convenience stores. But places like gyms, stadiums and theatres, they'll be shut.
As social distancing measures come into force, robots stood in for students at their university graduations. They celebrated in style from the comfort of their living rooms. Jake Sturmer, ABC News, Tokyo.
A Queensland Parks and Wildlife Ranger has been killed by a shark on the southern Great Barrier Reef. 23-year-old Zachary Robber was swimming with colleagues off Gladstone yesterday afternoon when the animal attacked.
It was an afternoon swim that ended in tragedy. 23-year-old Queensland Parks and Wildlife Ranger Zachary Robber was attacked by a shark while swimming near Northwest Island on Monday evening. He sustained serious injuries to his limbs. His colleagues frantically tried to save him. The young man was flown to Gladstone Hospital, where he later died.
Our family out there is grieving for a young man who tragically has lost his life in a horrific shark attack.
Police say the 4 wildlife rangers had been doing maintenance work on the island prior to the attack.
There was 4 people swimming off the back of a boat, cooling down after a day's work, and this male person was the last person to get out of the water. As he was about to get on the boat, he was attacked by a shark.
It's the 3rd shark attack off the coast of Gladstone in the past 3 months. A 30-year-old man was bitten in December and a young girl received non-life-threatening injuries in January. Today, Zachary Robber's former high school paid tribute to the young man.
He'd worked hard and had a long dream to get to this job, and it's come really shortly after arriving there, but he'd worked hard, he cared for the environment.
The Environment Minister said the Ranger network is like a family, and we've lost a brother today. I send my deepest condolences to his parents and loved ones. A family grieving a life cut short. Rachel McGee, ABC News, Gladstone.
Taking a quick look around the country tomorrow, Brisbane a possible shower and 27, Sydney showers and 21, Canberra a shower or two and a top of 18, Melbourne cloudy and 19, Hobart cloud decreasing and 17, Adelaide mostly sunny and 21. And that is ABC Late News. I'm James McHale. Stay with us for the business.